Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay at question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Less than 3 months ago, my party asked Parliament to instigate a Scottish grooming gangs inquiry. We did so because we knew that it was necessary. We knew it then, and we certainly know it now. Our amendment to the Victims' Bill was the only legal mechanism available to us. However, the SNP voted it down. And in doing so, the Justice Secretary cited the leading expert, Professor Alexis Jay. Angela Constance said that Professor Jay, and I quote, shares my view and has put on the record and stated to the media that she does not support further inquiries into child sexual abuse and exploitation. Does John Swinney think that the Justice Secretary's statement was honest?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I think it was a reflection. I think it was a reflection of the general comment that was being made about the issues at the time. But of course, as Mr Finlay knows, the government was looking at a whole range of different issues in relation to the examination of the issue of childhood sexual abuse, which of course builds on the work that we have undertaken already in establishing the inquiry into these issues that is chaired by Lady Smith. And of course, in the debate yesterday, the government set out further steps that we are taking, and I welcome very much the participation of Professor Alexis Jay in the work that the government is taking forward.
Russell Finlay.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. At no point did Professor Jay say there should be no further inquiries into grooming gangs in Scotland. The Justice Secretary misrepresented Professor Jay, she misled the Parliament, and she misled the public. And then she went AWOL. On November 19, she wasn't here to answer urgent questions about her misrepresentation. On November 25th, she put up a junior minister to answer urgent questions on the lack of knowledge about grooming gangs in Scotland. On November 26th, she again sat here in silence when we challenged her failure to answer questions. Yesterday, the Justice Secretary finally broke her silence, but she made no apology and didn't accept any wrongdoing whatsoever. The misleading of Parliament must be investigated by the independent advisers to the Ministerial Code. Will John Swinney support an investigation, and if it finds against the Justice Secretary, will he sack her?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I'm satisfied with the way in which these matters have been conducted, and what I'm also satisfied by is the steps that the government set out yesterday to Parliament, which is that there will be an independent national review of the response to group-based child sexual abuse and exploitation in Scotland, led by the Care Inspectorate, His Majesty's Inspector of Education, His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Health Improvement Scotland. I welcome the fact that Professor Alexis Jay has been appointed the independent chair for the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, and all of that work will be drawn together, assessed independently, and further advice will come to ministers and Parliament will be updated.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney says he's satisfied, but victims have no faith in this government and no faith in this Justice Secretary. The mother of Taylor, who was gang raped as a child in care, told me that there is, quote, no substance to anything that Angela Constance says, and that, and I quote, she cannot oversee anything. And I wonder if perhaps the First Minister has concluded the same thing in private. Yesterday's announcement of a grooming gangs review was announced not by the Justice Secretary, but by the Education Secretary. It looks like the responsibility for this inquiry and the decision-makings on its findings will not be Angela Constance. So has John Swinney also realised that she cannot possibly oversee this review? And does that not show that he's also lost confidence in his own Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
No, that is not the case. And the reason why the Education Secretary made the announcements yesterday is the Education Secretary carries Cabinet responsibility for child protection issues, in which all of this material is comprised. Yes. And the Cabinet Secretary for Education led the discussion at Cabinet on Tuesday, which involved all Cabinet colleagues, including the Justice Secretary, about the steps the government was taking, which I set out to Parliament last week in response to Pam Goso the government was taking forward. So all of this is the responsibility of the government, led by the Cabinet Secretary for Education, and I've set out to Parliament the steps that we're taking.
Russell Finlay.
So it sounds like the Justice Secretary will not have responsibility for review into mass organised criminality. But the First Minister suggests there's nothing
Let's hear Mr.
unusual
Finlay.
about that. The SNP have been shamed into launching a grooming gangs review. But it's a review that victims believe will see public bodies mark their own homework and the government control the findings. A review which we still don't fully know whether the Justice Secretary, who didn't want it to happen, who dishonestly twisted the words of an academic and who misled victims and the Parliament, might or might not be in charge of. All of this is why a review simply isn't good enough and that an independent inquiry is necessary. Victims don't trust Angela Constance, they don't trust the SNP or the authorities who have already failed them. They deserve answers, they deserve justice, and that can only be achieved by a free, fearless and independent inquiry. So why on earth can't John Swinney see this?
First Minister.
I recognise the significance and the seriousness of this issue, and it's been treated so within my government, which is why we have taken the careful steps to ensure that we do all of the explanatory work and investigative work to ensure that we come to the right conclusion about whether an inquiry of the nature that Mr Finlay put to Parliament yesterday is appropriate and necessary. Mr Finlay said that this is a whole collection of different organisations marking their own homework. The organisations I referred to are set up by statute that have to operate independently of government. That is what the law requires of them. And they are the Care Inspectorate, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Education, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Health Improvement Scotland. And I think it's really important that I, as First Minister, make clear openly to the public in Scotland that I have absolute confidence in the independent decision-making and scrutiny of these organisations, because it is vital for public confidence. We've seen in recent weeks reports from Healthcare Improvement Scotland which have been very, very critical and challenging to health boards in this country. That is because they are exercising independent and fearless scrutiny, as will Professor Alexis Jay as the independent chair of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group. And that gives me confidence that we are going about this process in a serious and detailed fashion to make sure that the perspective of victims is properly addressed as we consider this significant and serious issue.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, Audit Scotland has today published yet another damning report into the SNP's mismanagement of our NHS. It is grim reading for John Swinney, but more devastating for the patients and the staff. It found that despite more money and more staff, NHS Scotland's performance has not improved in line with commitments made by the Scottish Government. It says that NHS boards are struggling to break even, with 7 requiring government loans, and it exposes the implementation gap between SNP announcements and the reality for patients. Isn't it a damning indictment on John Swinney that despite his promises, long waits persist and that in his hands the NHS is, in Audit Scotland's words, unsustainable?
First Minister.
Anybody observing these exchanges at First Minister's questions will understand that I'm the first to accept that there are challenges in ensuring the NHS recovers from the disruption of 2 years of the COVID pandemic. And we're now in a situation where, for example, so I accept that challenge exists, but there is also significant progress being made. So, for example, the number of planned and performed operations in Scotland represents the highest levels since before the pandemic, since January 2020. In the 12 months to October 2025, there were 297,014 operations planned, a 4.5% increase from the previous 12 months, and while 271,328 operations were performed, an increase of 4.6%. So what that demonstrates is that while there are challenges, there's progress being made, and the plans that I've put in place to focus on long waits are now beginning to have effect.
Ms Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the NHS needs to recover from John Swinney and the SNP. That's the problem we've got across the country. Now, his predecessor promised to end waits of over a year by September 2024. He failed. John Swinney has promised to end waits of over a year by March 2026, but right now, more than 11,000 patients are waiting over 2 years. So what's the result? Figures published this week show a record number of patients are being forced to go private, with 13,455 private admissions between April and June this year. People in pain being forced to remortgage their homes and spend life savings to get their treatment they need. The founding principles of our NHS, free and available at the point of need, is being destroyed by the SNP. So why is John Swinney doing what even Margaret Thatcher failed to do, and that's privatise healthcare in Scotland?
First Minister.
It's interesting that Mr Sarwar has shifted the ground of his argument on private treatment, because some months ago Mr Sarwar put a figure to me which was of a much more significant accusation of the amount of private treatment that was underway. I can't remember exactly the proportion, but it was of the order of something like 1 in 6 of the population, which was absolutely a ludicrously nonsensical figure. So Mr Sarwar has changed his ground. Now let me give Mr Sarwar some reassurance about what's happening about long waits, because between April and October
Let's hear one another.
Between April and October this year, new outpatient waits for over a year reduced by 17.9% just since April. In the same period, the waiting list size for new inpatient and day case procedures over 52 weeks has reduced by 26.1%. So let me say to Mr Sarwar, I accept there are challenges in the National Health Service as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, but this government is delivering on the progress that I said would be made.
Anna Sarwar.
I think with that rambling response from the First Minister, he needs some time off and a wee rest, I think, because SNP-run Scotland was the only UK nation that saw an increase in private admissions during the period I quoted. The truth is that Scots are paying the price for John Swinney's incompetence. Thousands forced to go private to get the treatment they need, remortgaging homes or borrowing money to pay £15,000 for a knee replacement, over £14,000 for a hip replacement, £3,000 for cataract surgery. That means Scots have been forced to pay at least £59 million of their own money on top of their taxes for cataracts and hip and knee replacements in the last year alone, breaching the founding principles of our NHS, healthcare free and available at the point of need, not on the ability to pay. But for those who can't raise the money, they are left to wait in pain and anxiety. So why is John Swinney forcing Scots in need to choose between paying the financial cost or the human cost of his incompetence and failure?
First Minister.
I simply remind Mr Sarwar that our National Health Service was disrupted for a period of 2 years because of COVID, and there is a backlog in treatment, and we are working hard to ensure that we reduce that backlog. Now, to reassure Mr Sarwar, the number of hip and knee operations reached an all-time high in 2024, and as I've just recounted, we are performing more operations in the National Health Service now, and we are now back to levels where we're performing at a level pre-pandemic, which is an indication of the effectiveness of the reforms that I've put in place and the plans that are delivering for people in Scotland. And on that basis, this government is absolutely focused on making sure that the National Health Service meets the needs of people in Scotland as we recover from COVID and deliver on the expectations of the people of our country.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sorry to say, but the First Minister's head is completely in the sand about the crisis in our NHS. Everybody knows somebody who's been let down. And Sarwar rightly talks about the human cost. Let me tell him what that human cost looks like. Isabel and Martin Knights were travelling down the dual carriageway near Aberdeen when Isabel had a violent seizure and stopped breathing. With nowhere to pull over, Martin had to use every ounce of his police training to get her heart going again while the car was still moving, screeching to a halt at the front door of A&E and explaining to staff everything that had happened. However, after moving their car, Martin wasn't allowed to return to Isabel's side. A&E was just too busy. She was left alone in a corridor for 6 hours. Remember, her heart had only just been restarted. When she was eventually seen by a doctor, it was obvious that crucial information had been overlooked. So can I ask the First Minister, if you can turn up at accident emergency, having stopped breathing for minutes, and not be seen for hours, what does that say about the state of our NHS?
First Minister.
Well, first of all, President Officer, I'm very sorry to hear the details of the experience of Isabel and Martin Knights. I'm happy to explore the exact circumstances of the case that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me, but the purpose and the focus of accident and emergency is to provide the immediate intervention for those in the gravest of conditions, and that would be my expectation that that should happen in all circumstances.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, Martin and Isabel are absolutely clear. They are not having a go at hard-working staff who looked exhausted that day in A&E. Emergency departments are backed up because hospitals are rammed, because there are so many people stuck there who should be in care homes or looked after at home. That's what the Auditor General told us this morning. Let's put this into perspective. When the SNP first came to power, in a single month, only a handful of people ever waited more than 12 hours in accident and emergency. It hardly ever happened. Despite the best efforts of staff, that figure has increased by 63,000%. So can I ask the First Minister, doesn't Isabel and Martin's experience show how mistakes can be made, patients can be put in danger because accident and emergency is overwhelmed on the SNP's watch?
First Minister.
There will be a range of different factors that affect the circumstances in any accident and emergency department at any given time. Some of it will be about whole system challenges such as delayed discharge, where hospitals are so congested it is difficult to ensure that patients can be transferred from A&E into routine wards on a timely basis. And obviously we work with local authority partnerships, and the Health Secretary is actively pursuing this on my behalf this week to ensure that we reduce further the delayed discharge position to support accident and emergency. The second issue is obviously the caseload that presents at A&E, and in that respect we have taken forward work to put in place frailty units which enable us to support frail patients more actively and in a more supportive environment than the mainstream of A&E, where there can be some very acute and challenging circumstances. And the third factor is obviously the prevalence of individual health conditions. And as members of Parliament will know, we are seeing an early and significant upsurge in the prevalence of flu, which is resulting in very significant presentations at our hospitals. Indeed, in the last 2 weeks, we have had an increase of 70% in flu admissions to hospital as a consequence of the gravity of the conditions, despite the very high performance on flu vaccinations that are underway in our society. So, what I would say to Mr Cole-Hamilton is the Government is taking forward a range of different interventions to ensure that we are working to reduce demand within A&E services so that individuals like Isabel and Martin Knights can be supported in the way that I would expect them to be so.
Question number 4, Paul McLennan.
To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's latest engagement with the UK Government regarding any impact on poverty levels in Scotland of the freeze to local housing allowance.
First Minister.
So it's disappointing that the UK budget contained no commitment to end the freeze on local housing allowance. Next year will be the second year of the freeze, and it will be 3 years since the local housing allowance was last uprated. The Resolution Foundation has warned that next year the gap between real-world rents and housing support will be the biggest on record.
Paul McLennan.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? The Chancellor spoke about tackling child poverty, yet she failed to restore local housing allowance rates. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimated that 20,000 private renters, including 10,000 children, will be pushed into poverty in 25-26 as a direct result of this policy. Meanwhile, the Resolution Foundation predicts that the affordability gap, which is currently bigger than when the Conservative Government increased local housing allowance in 2020, will rise to 25% by 29-30 unless the UK Government intervenes. This amounts to £180 a month for hard-pressed families. While Labour continues to make lives harder for the most vulnerable, can the First Minister tell us more about the steps the Scottish Government is taking across housing to further its ambition of eradicating child poverty?
First Minister.
So the warnings from the Resolution Foundation are indeed deeply troubling. The Scottish Government is investing over £100 million in discretionary housing payments this year to offset UK Government welfare cuts. £2 million of this, announced by the Cabinet Secretary for Housing, will help families in temporary accommodation secure homes in the private rented sector. This is part of our mission to eradicate child poverty. And on the question of the local housing allowances, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice has been calling for an end to the freeze as part of the UK child poverty strategy, a move that would help to lift more families out of poverty.
Question number 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what funding is in place to ensure that the A9 dualling project is completed by the target date of 2035.
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government remains committed to completing the dualling programme by the end of 2035, and the necessary funding will be in place to do so.
Murdo Fraser.
I thank the First Minister for his response. This week, the Scotsman newspaper reported that ministers were expected to reject private funding under the mutual investment model, which had been planned for further sections of the A9 dualling project, even though this has been utilised for 2 sections which are progressing. And this raises real concerns about whether this vital scheme can now progress, given the constraints on capital funding in the Scottish Government's budget. A9 dualling has already been delayed 10 years from the original planned completion date of 2025, and any further delays will cost more lives needlessly. Just on Tuesday evening, we saw another serious accident at Rallia, leaving 1 passenger in a critical condition in hospital and the road closed for hours. So what guarantee can the First Minister give us that there will be no more delays delivering this vital project?
First Minister.
Sir, I was very sorry to hear about the incident on Tuesday evening at Rallia, and I express my good wishes to the individual who I understand is in a critical condition as a consequence, and we obviously hope for their full recovery. As I said in my earlier answer, the Government remains committed to completing the dualling programme by the end of 2035, and the necessary funding will be in place to do so.
Rhoda Grant.
Can I ask the First Minister if he would commit to introducing a duty of candour for the A9 project, as recommended by the Petitions Committee, to ensure that the Parliament and the public are fully informed about progress, delays and financial challenges in real time?
First Minister.
Well, the Government responded to that request by indicating it would report regularly to Parliament, and that's exactly what the Government will do.
Question number 6, Stuart McMillan.
And also to ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on whether the Scottish Government will instigate a direct award to Ferguson Marine for the replacement of the MV Lord of the Isles.
First Minister.
So the procurement for the replacement for the MV Lord of the Isles engages complex legal and subsidy control issues. Any decision must take into account the responsibility we have towards securing the best outcomes for our island communities and businesses. We are currently considering the business case and next steps in relation to the MV Lord of the Isles replacement, and will confirm these in due course.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the First Minister for that reply. And the presence of the Ferguson Marine and its workforce is important to my constituency. The only way the presence can continue is by ensuring the yard has a strong order book. And it's up to the new interim chair and management team to make the yard efficient and effective to win new orders, in addition to being supported by the Scottish Government in these endeavours. And I am very much aware of the arguments about why the direct award is extremely challenging. However, I'm also conscious of the level of investment the Scottish Government have already invested in the yard will be lost for good if the yard does not have an order book. So will the First Minister commit to a direct award of the replacement for the Lord of the Isles, one that could lead to securing further work if the board and management succeed to keep Ferguson Marine firmly rooted, creating employment and building ships in Port Glasgow?
First Minister.
So I'm very supportive of securing a future for the Ferguson Marine Yard. It is a yard that I worked very hard over 10 years ago to ensure survived the difficulties that it faced, and the Government has obviously given sustained support over many years. As I indicated in my earlier answer, the issues around about the MV Lord of the Isles direct award are complex. They involve significant issues around subsidy control that the Government cannot in any way, shape or form ignore. But I do give Mr McMillan the assurance that the Government is absolutely committed to working with Ferguson Marine to secure its future.
Thank you. Sue Webber.
Ferguson Marine's future depends on independently securing work both within the UK and overseas. This is an SNP government-owned yard. So what action is the First Minister taking to ensure that the yard is competitive, restores its reputation for delivering projects on time and under budget, and can procure its own work rather than relying on a direct award?
First Minister.
That's part of us ensuring that the yard has leadership in place and a workforce in place to support its direction, which is able to attract orders and can operate competitively on international markets. That's what government support for the yard is all about, and it will be the focus of our interventions to make sure that remains the case.
Katie Clark.
There is a strong economic and social case for a direct award to the yard, and I urge the First Minister to support such an award. A decision of this contract has been delayed for far too long, and the workforce deserve clarity. So can he undertake to ensure that there is a speedy decision? If the First Minister cannot commit to a direct award of this contract today, will he commit today to supporting Ferguson's through other avenues, such as the second round of the Small Vessels Replacement Programme, and delivering the promised £14.2 million investment in full?
First Minister.
In relation to, as I've indicated in my earlier answers, and I think Katie Clark will appreciate these points, there are complex issues of a legal nature in relation to subsidy control that the government just simply cannot ignore. And I'm enormously sympathetic and supportive of a future for the yard. That's why the government has committed investment to support the yard, which will be available to the yard at the moments in which it is appropriate for that to be deployed. And we are obviously open to working with the yard to strengthening its competitive position to enable it to win vessel contracts and to be able to take those forward on an ongoing basis. And that remains the focus of the government's intervention on this issue.
Alistair Allen.
Does the First Minister agree that whatever solution is found to the tender in question, it must be a decision informed by the views of people in Uist and other island communities who clearly want to see new vessels in service as soon as feasible?
First Minister.
I understand that point and support it. Obviously, it was under this government that the connection between Mallaig and Loch Boisdale was established, which is the route that the MV Lord of the Isles primarily operates. I know how important that connection is to the constituents of Dr Allen and South Uist and surrounding communities, and it's important that we reflect on the necessity for sustained connections for all island communities, and that lies at the heart of the government's strategy in relation to the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Residents of Bothwell in my region have been left shaken by the spate of targeted firebombing attacks on restaurants within the area. 4 premises have been targeted by arson attacks over the last 6 years, with 2 taking place in September. Those living in Bothwell have expressed fear and frustration, with one individual saying it feels like it's becoming a no-go area socially. There are now empty plots where restaurants once stood. Jobs have been lost and families have been impacted by recent events. Bothwell residents deserve answers, but they also deserve reassurance. So what reassurance can the First Minister give to my constituents that these events are being taken seriously by Police Scotland? And will he ask for the relevant minister to make inquiries to ensure that all information that can be made public is being circulated within the community?
First Minister.
I'm obviously aware of these issues and concerned by them. I would reassure Megan Gallagher and her constituents that all cases that are presented to Police Scotland are taken seriously. That will be the case in relation to these examples, and obviously there is patently obvious there's criminal behaviour involved here, so there will be the need for that information to be handled within the criminal justice system to ensure that those responsible can be prosecuted for the acts that they are taking forward. So with that caveat, I'm very happy to advise that the Justice Secretary will raise this issue with the Chief Constable, but the amount of information that can be available will be constrained by the necessity of protecting that information to support criminal prosecutions, which there should be in the cases of the behaviour that Megan Gallagher has put to me today.
Aaron Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government promised to end the dither and delay and committed £200 million to the Acorn project in June, yet months on, not a single penny has reached the developers, and now a project partner is seeking to sell its stake. After failing to intervene at Grangemouth and Mossmoran, and after retaining an energy profits levy throttling investment, if the UK Government fail to act on Acorn, it will be clear that they have abandoned Scottish industry. So does the First Minister agree that if a private buyer cannot be found for the stake, GB Energy must step in to ensure this project does go ahead, particularly in light of them setting their 5-year project today?
First Minister.
President, I've been very clear to Parliament my support over a long period of time for the Acorn project. Indeed, it's an issue that I raised frequently with the previous Conservative United Kingdom Government to seek progress upon, and it's also an issue that I've raised with the current United Kingdom Government to seek progress on. Obviously, in relation to the discussions involving the Storega within the Acorn project, the Deputy First Minister has been involved in dialogue with the United Kingdom Government on that question. And I think this is a significant project that is a key to the just transition and to the economic opportunities of the North East of Scotland. And the Scottish Government will do all that we can to support its development. I would also make the point that the presence of the energy profits levy is a significant inhibitor in all of our actions, and I would call on the United Kingdom Government, as I will do when I see the Prime Minister tomorrow, to remove the energy profits levy because of the damage it's doing to the North East of Scotland and the future of the Scottish economy.
Thank you. Mercedes Vialba.
Last week, fossil fuel giant Shell UK were fined over £500,000 after pleading guilty to 2 offences following an HSE investigation into its Brent Charlie platform. This was a potentially catastrophic incident that put the lives of over 175 offshore workers at risk due to negligence and penny pinching by Shell. Does the First Minister agree with me that such behaviour from Shell is wholly unacceptable and that offshore worker health and safety must be paramount to our energy transition if it is to be in any way just?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on all occasions, the welfare and the safety of workforces must be paramount in any industrial activity in our country. That's why the Health and Safety Executive, which is of course a reserved agency, exercises its responsibilities, and why I support strongly the work of the Health and Safety Executive to ensure the very aspirations that Mercedes Vialba puts to me are reflected in the working practices in all circumstances, and particularly in the acutely serious context of offshore platforms. So I very much welcome the role of the HSE in protecting the safety of workers.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the UK Chancellor increased duty on Scotch whisky. This has heaped pressure on this vital sector, the jobs within it, including in my own constituency. But another bigger issue is US tariffs, and the First Minister has already pressed the case all the way to the Oval Office. But will he now exert pressure on the UK Government to stand up for Scotland and press for a deal in this vitally important industry?
First Minister.
Well, I'm very keen to make sure there is a deal arrived at on whisky tariffs. As Parliament will know, I've put significant effort into trying to ensure this case is made directly to the President of the United States. But as Parliament also knows, trade deals cannot be negotiated by the Scottish Government. They have to be negotiated by the United Kingdom Government. So I am waiting with expectation for the United Kingdom Government doing what they should have been doing all along, which is giving a priority to Scotch whisky and making sure we're exempt from tariffs with the United States. We're waiting for the United Kingdom to deliver the action that we all expect them to deliver.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last Friday, the UK National Screening Committee decided not to recommend a national screening programme for prostate cancer. The very next day, listeners to Off the Ball heard Kenny McIntyre speak very candidly about his own diagnosis with prostate cancer. Kenny was getting regular tests because of a family history of the disease, and he said this: "I'm very lucky to have caught this early, and I believe that is only because I pushed for regular testing. I had absolutely no symptoms and all examination indicated things were normal. Had it not been for regular checks which revealed the rising trend in my PSA levels things may have been very different. We're lucky that we have men like Kenny McIntyre, Sir Chris Hoy and others who are speaking about their own experience, raising awareness and encouraging men to come forward and get checked. But prostate cancer is still killing 1,000 men in Scotland every year. So can I ask the First Minister for his response to the National Screening Committee's recommendation? And does he agree with me that if we do not have a national programme, we should at the very least be encouraging as many men as possible to come forward and get tested, make those tests as easily available as possible, because they will literally save lives?
First Minister.
President Officer, I very much associate myself with the comments that Douglas Ross has made. Mr Ross will be aware that the Government relies on the advice from the UK National Screening Committee, as do governments across the United Kingdom, and that is dispassionate advice that is gathered by the Screening Committee and shared with us. And Mr Ross will appreciate that although many of us will be enormously sympathetic to the point of view he has put forward, when we receive formal advice, we have to have good reason to depart from that advice. I chaired a discussion in Butte House a few weeks ago with, at the request of Sir Chris Hoy, which drew together a range of different experts on prostate cancer, in which I wanted to challenge whether or not there was more that could be done to expand the approach to screening, which was very much the request of Sir Chris Hoy, and I obviously heard that very strongly from the contribution of Kenny McIntyre at the weekend. So we've asked the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland to take forward further scrutiny and consideration of this issue, and ministers in the Scottish Government were very open to looking afresh at these questions. So there will be further updates that we can share with Parliament in due course. But the point that I do reinforce of what Mr Ross has put to me today is that I would encourage any man who is concerned about these issues to pursue any testing that they think is necessary, given the fact that we all know the earlier such circumstances are identified, the better the outcomes are likely to be. So I welcome the contribution Mr Ross has made and assure him of the focused intervention of the Government to try to address this issue.
Jackie Baillie.
The First Minister will be aware of Turning Point Scotland, a major voluntary sector provider of drug and alcohol services. The charity is facing an existential funding crisis after being billed £800,000 by City Property Glasgow Investments, an arm's-length organisation of Glasgow City Council. This bill for repairs following the closure of the outstanding 218 Women's Justice Service is £600,000 more than estimated by an independent surveyor. This poses a very real risk to all Turning Point services in Glasgow. The Council's not responding, neither is the Board of City Property Glasgow Investments. So will the First Minister agree to meet with Turning Point, and I know he thinks they are a valuable organisation, and will he help to resolve the situation to ensure the continuing provision of Turning Point's drug and alcohol services in Glasgow?
First Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of the services that are provided by Turning Point Glasgow. This is obviously a local matter for Glasgow City Council. I will inquire as to the situation that is pertaining here and identify with the Drugs and Alcohol Minister, Marie Todd, if there is any action the Government can take. Obviously, I don't know, I'm not familiar with all of the transactions here, but we will look into this and see what action is possible to be taken.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, Scotland is now the only UK nation that is seeing a reduction in deaths by suicide. Frontline organisations credit early intervention and strong partnership working. This is something I see in my community action network that I facilitate in Motherwell and Wishaw. So how will the Government promote best practice and ensure that suicide rates continue to fall in Scotland?
First Minister.
We must be very active as a government and as a society to do all that we can to prevent suicide in our society. We have been working in partnership with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities on the strategy Creating Hope Together, which is delivered through Suicide Prevention Scotland, and it's focused on tackling the prevalence of suicide and the inequalities which so often lead to that. I can assure Claire Adamson the Government will continue that focus in the Suicide Prevention Action Plan for 2026 to 2029, which will be published early in the new year, to continue this important work.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. Declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. William McLaughlin wrote to me telling me that he had to sit on an A&E trolley for 8 hours before he was admitted for a serious illness. And the Audit Scotland report has laid bare the abject failure of this SNP government, from hospitals crumbling to waiting lists crumbling. Everything the SNP touches seems to be crumbling. First Minister, stop the spin, stop reading selective stats, stop defending the indefensible and accept the full independent Audit Scotland report in full. So will the First Minister apologise to NHS staff, apologise to long waiting patients and apologise to William McLaughlin?
Always through the chair. First Minister.
I'm very open with Parliament about the challenges that are experienced in the National Health Service, and I accept that for some individuals the treatment they receive takes longer to happen than should be the case, and that will cause distress. And to Mr McLaughlin and to anyone in such circumstances, I express my apology and my regret at that situation. But it is just not good enough for Sandesh Gulhani to say the things that he said about the performance of our National Health Service, because the plan that I put in place, which is designed to tackle long waits, is working. It is delivering results. Between April and October this year, new outpatient waits over a year reduced by 17.9%, reductions for 5 consecutive months. In the same period, the waiting list size for new inpatient and day case procedures over 52 weeks has also reduced by 26.1%. GP numbers, which should be of some concern to Dr Gulhani, are rising on my watch. So yes, there are challenges, but this government is delivering the solutions for the National Health Service in Scotland.
Patrick Harvey.
I know the First Minister is aware of the scale of the housing crisis in Glasgow, a crisis which has been exacerbated by UK changes to asylum policy, changes which are harming the lives of asylum seekers but also harmful to the budgets available for public services. So can the First Minister tell us, since his officials started meeting with the local authority, RSLs and others to discuss this situation, what urgent action has the Scottish Government taken to ensure that the Council, social landlords and others have the resources they need to deal with this crisis, which is not of their making?
First Minister.
The first thing that we've done is obviously press the Home Office to address these issues, because the Home Office is the root cause of the issues and difficulties that Mr Harvey raises in Parliament today, and we work collaboratively with Glasgow City Council in that respect. Some of the other steps that we've taken have been to increase the investment in housing, and particularly to increase the investment in ensuring that void accommodation is brought back into use. And in partnership with Glasgow City Council, we have been seeing much progress being made, and I commend Glasgow City Council for the work that they are taking forward, working obviously with registered social landlords in the process. And as a consequence of the support that we make available to the Council, particularly in relation to homelessness support, we are working as effectively as we can to tackle the significant issues that Mr Harvey raises.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister whether non-residential social care charges will be abolished by the Scottish Government before the end of the current parliamentary session, as was promised by his party's 2021 manifesto?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government is working to address this issue. There are obviously a whole range of competing financial pressures that we have to address, and we are working in collaboration with partners to address these questions.
Keith Brown.
The First Minister will know that before the election last year, the Labour Party promised to widen devolution for Scotland and Wales. This week, 11 Labour members of the Welsh Senate wrote to the Prime Minister accusing the UK Government of rolling back on devolution promises. Whether it's the internal market or pride in place funding, their abysmal record in government shows their contempt for devolution. Indeed, Welsh members of the Assembly have described their own party's actions as a constitutional outrage.
Let's hear Mr Brown. Thank you.
Welsh Labour members have described their own party's actions as a constitutional outrage, showing at least a willingness to defend the devolution settlement, a willingness absent in the Labour Party in this chamber. Does the First Minister... Members,
let us hear Mr Brown. I know every member in the chamber would expect to be heard when they're putting a question.
They don't like freedom of speech, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister share these concerns, and can he outline what dialogue the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government around devolution settlements, particularly in relation to the UK Internal Market Act and Pride in Place funding?
First Minister.
President Officer, I acknowledge the letter that's been sent by a number of members of the Senate to Labour members of the Senate to the Prime Minister, which expresses views which this government would share about the unacceptability of the Internal Market Act, which is a product of the post-Brexit legislation of the Conservatives, which is undermining the powers of this Parliament in the way in which it is actively taking forward that issue. Now, of course, when the Internal Market Act was making its passage through the United Kingdom Parliament, the Labour Party in Scotland, and indeed the Labour Party in the House of Commons, was vigorously opposed to the Internal Market Act. So our reasonable expectation when the Labour government was elected was that the Internal Market Act would be abolished and that we would have a restoration of the powers of this Parliament. Of course, as with so many other promises of the Labour Party, that was broken immediately after the election of the Labour government. So there is just absolutely no confidence we can have that the Labour government is going to fulfil its promises to protect devolution and abolish the Internal Market Act.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Jamie Hepburn, and there will now be a suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery and the chamber